Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Person You Want to Be. I am your host, Eric Teplitz. Today, it is my great privilege to have with me as my guest, Mitch Davidowitz. Mitch Davidowitz is a psychotherapist, educator, nature photographer, and inspirational writer and teacher. He received his bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Florida and a master's and specialist degree in counseling, also from the University of Florida. In addition, he holds a master's degree in social work from Simmons University. Mitch has worked with individuals and couples since 1980 and currently maintains a private practice outside of Boston, Massachusetts. His work has been profoundly influenced by his spiritual studies and intensive training in Vipassana meditation for the past 50 years. Mitch's wise reflections on love, grief, mindfulness, and navigating our lives with an open heart are published daily on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and in the Ram Dass group on Facebook. He is currently putting together a book which will be a compilation of these well-received and much-loved daily postings. Mitch Davidowitz, welcome to The Person You Want to Be.
Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate this opportunity to connect and reflect aloud together.
I love it. I'm so looking forward to it. And I just, gave your formal introduction, but I think a better way to introduce you to the audience is to share one of your recent postings, because I think this is what connected me to you. And I think it's a beautiful example of your message and what you're all about. So I will read your words back to you. Every drop matters. We open in the presence of love and safety. Everything needs to be nourished. When we understand that the smallest gesture toward our experience or those around us can be transformative, we honor every drop. Recently, I wrote about how a smile can save a life. The simple words, "I am truly sorry," can soften a heart. There are those amongst us who never heard a parent say, "I love you." There are places within us that may feel parched with the absence of tenderness. Just as being seen through the eyes of love nurtures us, every drop of judgment and shame withers the petals of our spirit. The next time you criticize yourself for being human, allow yourself to feel its impact. In any given moment, we can offer ourselves a drop of encouragement. As I vacuumed up the grated cheese that chose to jump out of my refrigerator last night, I reminded myself that I will be more careful next time. We must stop indicting ourselves for bumbling and stumbling. Letting go of the inner bully awakens the compassionate friend. A drop of acknowledgement with someone who is mourning comforts the heart. "You really miss your father. I know your daughter meant the world to you." When we meet the suffering of grief with platitudes of reassurance, we sting the wound. "You can get another dog. Your child is now an angel of heaven, or an angel in heaven." Empathic affirmation allows someone to have their pain in your presence. A drop of mindfulness brings a gentle attention to our life without resistance. It is here that we heal from the relentless entanglements of our mind. We remind ourselves to celebrate the gift of life when we focus on gratitude. Every drop of kindness touches a heart. What are the drops you need to empower within yourself and with others? Do not miss the opportunity to honor and act on those that are available in every moment. Water your soul with love. Now, sometimes I tear up when I read your reflections. And as you have advised, there's no need to apologize for that. This is such a startling anomaly in my experience in the world of social media to have something like that pop up in my feed. And you do this every single day. So I just wanted to share that because I thought it was a great example of the kinds of things that you write about and share on social media each day. And with that, I'd like to just jump right into this interview with my favorite first question to ask my guests, which is to ask you, Mitch, to think about your earliest memories and your earliest sense that you may have had of who it was you were, what you were about, what you were wanting to or felt called to do. This can be as fanciful as any kid's notion of what they feel like they want to do or be might be, or whatever comes up for you. And if you could also just provide us a little bit of context about the environment in which you grew up as well.
So I grew up in the late 50s, early 60s in Yonkers, New York. And I am reminded that a dear friend who I remain connected with since kindergarten said to me, "You were always very curious about how other kids were doing when a parent died, that there was a kind of sensitivity about, I wonder how Joe is feeling when a mother or father died suddenly or of an illness." So I think that was clearly a foreshadowing of an arc in my life. So that was one. The other is that early in life, elementary school, I was more interested in having other kids laugh, getting them to laugh, than reporting on my book report, much to the chagrin of my teachers, and would get in trouble a lot. Found myself in the principal's office or getting suspended because I wanted to be playful. And those teachers would be shocked by what became of me. First and foremost, as a grief educator and grief therapist, and also that comedy has been a central part of my life. Softening hearts so that we can bear what we need to bear. And so I would say those are a couple of themes early on that catapulted me to where I am now.
Yeah, that's great. I'm wondering, as a kid, did you feel punished when you were sent? Like, how did you respond to you're trying to be playful and make people feel good and make them laugh, and you get punished for this repeatedly by being told in so many different fashions, no, Mitch, no, this is not good, and you get sent to the principal's office, etc. Do you remember what you made of that? How you took that in?
Clearly, my material needed to be better.
You weren't landing with the adults in the room, is
Yeah,
that?
I mean, yeah, that's exactly right. And so, that was the memo I got because it happened, throughout early schooling. And so, no, I didn't feel shamed by it. I clearly didn't get a message that I better straighten up.
Hmm.
Uh, it really wasn't until we moved to Florida when I was 15 years old that a real profound change in who I was unfolded. If I had stayed in New York, we would not be having this conversation. Absolutely not.
Okay,
So
so
yeah,
can you speak to some of those changes that you're alluding to at age 15 and the move to Florida? What, you know,
well,
what changed?
my pack that I ran with, my friends,
Mhm.
my buddies, were all gone. And in Florida, they were quite serious about studies down there. And so I pivoted from being a wannabe comedian to being a diligent student. And
Wow.
so I went from, let's see, in eighth grade, flunking 5 subjects, going to summer school, to making the honor roll regularly in high school and the dean's list in college and on from there. So that was one thing. The seriousness and the lack, the audience went away. Uh,
Right. But
Clearly, what are you going to do?
you didn't try to rally a new one. So do you attribute this to just the different environment brought out this other side of you?
I remember attempting to continue my roadshow, and then the principal said, you can either take 3 days suspension or 5 whacks with a paddle. 5 whacks with a paddle. So they were not messing around,
Hmm.
and I took the suspension,
Right.
and so that was one huge thing. I got sober in terms of what was important. So that was one.
Right.
And then I'm sure we'll talk about it later. 5 years later was introduced to meditation. Um, and then as I think about it, just a couple years after getting there in high school, I was introduced to the work of Leo Buscaglia, who was a professor in California and talking about love. And there is no doubt that the embers of my heart and soul were curious about what he was doing.
Hmm.
And so I would say those things came into alignment for me.
Fascinating. I remember watching Leo's PBS specials or shows growing up as well, and was really touched by them. And it was not the typical messages that were being broadcast over the air, kind of like you on social media.
Right.
It was disarming how he could speak so freely and openly about loving each other. It's not something that you heard people talking about. So it was, and I remember also being quite moved by those talks that he gave.
Right.
Um, yeah, it just shows you the power of media. The message, you can use the same form of media to spread whatever message you choose, right? But it's powerful. So
Right.
okay, you went to University of Florida, and did you know right off the bat you were going to be a psychology major?
As an adolescent, people would say to me, "You're a really good listener. You should be a counselor." And it was really just naturally who I was to listen, to be curious again about what moved people, the entanglements of our life. I wanted to understand that. And so began studying psychology. And what I learned were a lot of theories. I really didn't get any real wisdom or clarity about that, but a lot of information. And I had a roommate there who had said to me, "You don't know how lucky you are to live with me." And he had just come back from a 6-week mindfulness retreat. He was quite chilled out. I was quite turned off to his arrogance, but I was quite turned on by how present he was. And so 1974, he said, we're going to do a 10-day meditation retreat in our apartment. You're welcome to stay over the holiday. And so that was really the initiation into learning more deeply about who we are and what moves us. And so that happened at the University of Florida in 74.
When he said, we are going to have a meditation retreat in our apartment, who was the we he was referring to?
There were 6 other of us, 6 other people, and that we were going to be interviewed daily by a Buddhist teacher out in California to see how we were doing. And so it was an hour of sitting meditation and an hour of walking meditation, no talking, no writing, no reading, no journaling, just being together in silence. And so that was part of an early training that for me was far superior than my degree in psychology.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that. And 1974, how did you communicate with this teacher out in California each day? How was that done?
It was a speakerphone placed in the middle of the room, and he was on a phone, and he would just ask each of us about how we were doing.
I love your point about experience versus theory and information.
Right.
And you went as far as to say that that experience was more valuable than the entire degree in psychology.
Right.
That's a big statement.
Pretty powerful. It reminds me of Carl Jung, I believe, who said, know all the theory, no, study all the techniques, but when touching a human soul, just be a human soul. And so that was kind of the heart of my learning.
Wow. So interestingly, even though you were, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but even though you felt that the degree itself was not nearly as valuable to you as the experience with meditation and being present, you still decided to pursue further education.
Right.
Did you go directly into your first master's program right out of undergrad, or was there something in between?
There was a 3-year break in 78, moved out to California to see what was happening. And with my bachelor's degree in psychology, I got a job in a toy store. And
times have not changed in some regard.
No, at least I understood why people were choosing the toys that they choose. And so in 1980, I realized, you know what? If I want to do more, I'm going to need more training. And so came back to the University of Florida to get a degree in counseling.
Yeah. So a couple of questions before we get to that master's program. First question would be, after that initial 10-day retreat in your apartment, did you pursue meditation further? And if so, what did that look like before grad school?
Right. So that was in December 74. I was so transformed by that experience that I sent a deposit out to that teacher in California and did a month there. Little did I know, my roommate, who was supposed to be with me on that, bailed soon into it. And I was alone for a month, sitting and walking and just being with myself, doing this method of walking, meditation, and sitting. And then from that point on, that was 74, every 6 months, I was somewhere in the United States on a retreat. And in 76, I came up here to Massachusetts. I had been listening to audio tapes of Joseph Goldstein and Jack Kornfield, two prominent Vipassana meditation teachers, and myself and that roommate and 30 others did a 3-month retreat.
Wow.
It was $6 a day for food, housing, teachings, and no, there were no dinosaurs around at the time. It was 76.
The Insight Meditation Society?
Yes, in Barre, Massachusetts. An
Yeah,
extraordinary place to be quiet, to learn the art of silence.
right. And my understanding is that that was founded by Jack Kornfield, Joseph Goldstein, and Sharon Salzberg, all of whom had studied meditation pretty deeply in the East and had come back to the West and with a sort of mission of spreading these teachings to people out here.
Right. And also Stephen Schwartz, who was not a teacher, but one of their friends, found this old Catholic monastery in Western Mass, and they began to launch these retreats. Yes, they had all studied in India and Buscaglia, in Burma as well, Buscaglia, India and Burma, and that's where they got their training.
Yeah, but again, to talk about media, so they reached you initially via audio cassette, huh?
Right, right. I was blown away by just the simplicity, the wisdom. It resonated with everything that happened on that 10-day retreat. And there were no beliefs or religion. The thing about this meditation is you don't have to be anything. There were nuns, priests, fathers, pastors, rabbis that have been on these retreats. It's not about beliefs. And so that was quite compelling.
Yeah. Did you have were you raised with any particular religious, orientation or not?
I was not a very good Jewish kid in that my parents, they were not focused on that. I learned about the culture, but I was raised with really nothing about the religion. And so naturally at 20, I wanted to understand more. And so pursued a Eastern path, which ironically, many Jewish people, they call them
Jubus.
Buddhist Jew, yeah, Jubus. And so all of the teachers are Jewish. A lot of students have studied Judaism.
Yeah, that's an interesting connection. And Jack Kornfield, by training, was a psychotherapist, right? So I'm sure that that also resonated with you because you shared that in common with him. I mean, you weren't fully trained yet, but you certainly were in that direction. You were moving in that direction, studying psychology, and with this idea of being a counselor.
Right.
And perhaps having that background really was helpful for disseminating these teachings because he understood enough about psychology to make these teachings relevant and meaningful to people in the West who maybe had no prior experience with it.
Absolutely. I mean, both he and Joseph Goldstein, Sharon, translated it and really are responsible for the global kind of teachings that have really caught fire.
Yeah. Who was, just out of curiosity, who was the California teacher that did that initial retreat with you in your apartment in Florida, and then that you found compelling enough to go out to California and do a retreat in person with?
His name was Anagarika Sujata, and he had studied with Munindra in Bodh India, who also was Joseph Goldstein's teacher, back in the early days. Actually, Joseph studied with him in Burma, as did Sujata in Burma. And so the other significant influence on my life, and when you spoke earlier about Jack being able to translate it, was Ram Dass.
Hmm.
And Ram Dass was a Harvard psychologist and got fired from Harvard along with Timothy Leary for experimenting with LSD. And while I was at the University of Florida in 1976, there was posters around that said, "Spend Thanksgiving with Ram Dass." I had also been listening to his audio tapes that someone had given me, and I signed up for a weekend, 300 people,
Hmm.
dramatically different than Jack and Joseph. Ram Dass is more Hindu, Buddhist, if you will. He also did retreats at Insight Meditation Society and very much supported that. But he was also, his teacher was a Hindu, Neem Karoli Baba. All of this for me, Eric, in some ways was like, wow, given where I grew up, what
Hmm.
I was doing in New York, if you would have mentioned any of this stuff at that time, you would have been beat up. You would have been beat up and shamed and laughed at. And so it came at the right time.
Hmm.
Uh, it came at the right time.
How
In
do
the
you, yeah, how do you view that now in retrospect? Does it feel like fate? Does it feel like just serendipity? What do you make of that? Because I am just endlessly fascinated by these events that become inflection points in our lives that we seemingly did not invite. Sometimes they just kind of are a function of our being introduced to something or someone or our environment, and it sends us on a path we never ever could have imagined. So I'm curious to hear what you think about that.
I am totally aligned with that. This roommate who introduced me to meditation, I had actually been taking classes with him at a junior college in South Florida. And I was interested in this girl, this woman, young woman, in the same row of a class of psychology. And this guy sat between us. And he was in the way,
Yeah.
obviously, and kept trying to get to know me. What I didn't realize is that he was going to be the doorway to what was to be who I later became, what I got involved with. And so, absolutely, it was a fortuitous moment that we were placed in that row,
Hmm.
in that class. And I don't think it was any accident
Hmm.
at all. While sitting on that month retreat in California, I had a spontaneous image of thousands of monks to the left, right, behind me. And there was some sense of knowing that I belonged in that practice.
Hmm.
Not for any religious reasons, but that was going to be my path. And so, absolutely, that was a pivotal moment.
Yeah. When you moved to California after you received your bachelor's degree, what drew you had already been to California for that month-long retreat
Yes,
at
that's
that
right.
point? So, you know, what was it that drew you back specifically to California for those 3 years before you returned
I
to?
had I had a lot of friends in California, and also Ram Dass was in California,
Mm.
and so I did a lot of study with him. Went to retreats with him and Stephen Levine, beautiful poet, and also wound up in an inner circle going to Ram Dass's house for Christmas, Christmas Eve, working with him individually.
Mm.
And so there was an opportunity to do more intensive study. Jack and Joseph were teaching out there, did retreats with them as well. So it was a real rich time for deepening my practice.
Got it. But the toy store wasn't cutting it, and ultimately that's what brought you back to grad school in Florida.
I think it was clear that I was destined for something bigger than the model section of KB Toy in California.
Right. Okay, so thank you for all of that. So you returned to Florida for what ended up being your first master's degree in counseling. And I know that pretty early on in this new education pursuit, a really, really pivotal experience
Right.
presented itself to you. Do you want to talk about
Yeah.
that?
So in 81, first semester of training, my mother died. Died of lung cancer, had never smoked.
Mm.
I learned of it, I learned of it on Thanksgiving, and 4 months later, she was gone, the age of 63. So this was another, and a good word, pivotal, in that I had no intention of pursuing grief work, even though I shared that work. I was training to be a marital and family therapist. But I was so shocked by the response to my grief, the absence of understanding. I remember going into a colleague's office, or I should say a professor's office, and he said, "How are you doing?" I said, "Not too good, still grieving." And he said, "How long has it been?" And I said, "6 months." He said, "You should be getting over that by now." And I understood that he didn't understand. And I wound up doing my master's thesis on things people say to those in loss.
Mm.
And so that got published in 84, but I started to explore that, took a semester off from college to grieve this fairly sudden and traumatic loss in my life at 26. And then in 84, I became the bereavement coordinator of a hospice, and then started to teach and work around that. And also in 80, the beginning of my training, I would start to get clients who had lost someone. So again, all of this was shaped by things that happened that were calling to me.
Wow.
And sometime today, I would certainly like to talk to you about callings and what that means. But yes, that was a profound shift and formed the foundation of who I was to become.
I'm wondering, as a beginning therapist and counselor in your 20s, having had this recent loss yourself and having people come in to see you who had their own grief, how did you handle that? How did you not identify with it? I mean, obviously you must have identified with it, but how did you contain your own grief while interacting with people presenting theirs?
Great question. And so therein lies one of the gifts of mindfulness meditation, in that mindfulness allows for the spaciousness and for everything that arises just to be there. And so there was no resistance in me to what would get triggered. I certainly wasn't crying with my clients. If tears came, as naturally would happen, I allowed them to be there. So there was no judgment. I didn't have the expectation that I shouldn't be sad.
Right.
And so I just let it be.
And to this day, is that still the case? Do you still find yourself, when seeing a client, sometimes moved to tears in their presence? Is that a regular occurrence? I mean, I'm just curious.
That I would be moved to tears
Yeah.
certainly when parents are talking about the death of their children, one would need to have a stone heart not to be moved. But having done this for decades, you can't do that work unless you have a healthy boundary that allows you not to so deeply identified that you're taken into that kind of emotion. So yes, I feel it, but I also have a healthy boundary that allows me to show up for them and understand what I'm there about.
And I I don't know because I have not had any such training, but I would find it surprising if that's something that could be taught in training. I would imagine it would have to be developed through years of practice.
You would get information about it, how to have an emotional firewall, but you would learn through being in session that you cannot so enter
Yeah.
a client's world that you get lost and provoked and triggered, what's commonly called countertransference, and get all stirred up in that way. You can't be of any service to anyone.
Right. And is that where supervision comes in and could potentially be really helpful?
Absolutely. That to really talk about if you're losing your sense of balance.
Yeah, and supervision, just for those who may not be familiar with that term in this context, refers to when you're training as a therapist and you're seeing clients and you're doing this under quote unquote supervision. Can you speak to that a little bit about what that
And
entails?
in each of the master's degrees that I trained for, you were placed in a facility, for me, it was mental health clinics, and you were required to be supervised while there. And then in order to get licensed, you needed to be supervised for 2 years post-masters. And since I left Florida, I was supervised up here in order to get when I wound up getting my MSW.
Yeah, and again, just for clarification, for those who are unfamiliar, supervision doesn't mean there's a therapist in the room with you as you're doing your practice, but it's someone that you're debriefing with on a regular basis and
Right.
getting counsel from. Is that right?
It is, except when I was training as a family therapist, they used a reflecting mirror
Uh-huh.
to mirror, and so there was a team behind the mirror watching what I was doing. And so it's a good thing anxiety is not part of the issues that I struggle with, because that would have been a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and did that change at some point? I mean, like how was that, you know, in terms of supervision, because there's the associations with a glass mirror, you think of like criminals, right? Criminal interviews and things. But it makes sense, right? Like, I mean, it would make sense for people to be able to observe what you're doing in real time as opposed to just reporting on it. But have practices changed since then in regard to supervision?
I don't know whether they're still using that, but also families would agree, because it would be a benefit for them in that the team would call in questions. And so it became a collaboration.
Oh, wow.
It would get the benefit
Hmm.
of, really very well experienced clinicians.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That clarification. And how did you receive your master's program? By receive, I mean, how did you feel about it in comparison, say, to your undergrad? Did it feel more satisfying in that there was more practice and not just theory?
Yeah. Master's in psychology is not about training to be a counselor or a clinician. You learn things, but it's vastly different than the master's in counseling, where you're in the field practicing and you're learning specifically about how to do counseling. And so I had a good head start with that, both with people used to come to me with their problems when I was younger.
Hmm.
And there was a kind of maturity, despite spending a lot of time in the principal's office. When I wasn't doing that, there was maturity to be able to help people. So I felt like I was like coming home to who I was as a helper and healer.
Right. Returning to this idea of the things that people say to people who are grieving, and
Right.
how unhelpful these things typically are. I would say almost always not by intention, right?
Right.
But nevertheless, the effect is that the person grieving feels misunderstood, feels uh, maybe any number of negative things. And this is something that's sorely lacking, I think, just in education in general. I can recall myself when I was a freshman in college that two different friends of mine each lost a parent. And I had no idea what to say. No idea. I felt helpless as to, and so I would, my guess is that it was just avoided like the plague. The subject was just not even mentioned, which had to have been awfully hurtful. Um, can you speak to, since this is an area of expertise of yours, can you just speak a little bit to the unhelpful things that are typically said and what might actually be helpful if you are a friend or a loved one of someone who is grieving?
Right. Important question. Someone wrote a book years ago called Don't Take My Grief Away. And I think that really captures the predicament. In our efforts to cheer someone up, help them to feel better, we give them a million different reasons why they shouldn't have their experience. At least he had good years. At least he didn't suffer. At least you have other children. We spin the grief so that the person will, the intention is, feel better about the loss. And the paradox is that we help people most by simply affirming and validating their actual experience. That you're right, people feel helpless in knowing what to say. We really have no understanding about it. And that's why when I did my research, departments of psychiatry around the world were wanting copies because there was no education really about what do you say to people in loss. And so the simple thing to remember is if what you're about to say allows the person to have their experience as they're describing it, then it can be helpful. And so it's the validating, affirming. You were very close to your father, as you read earlier in that post. Or asking a question. Tell me about your mother. What are you missing about her? What made her really special? It's not just about being a therapist. It's about being a human being
Hmm.
that recognizes that someone's heart is broken. And rather than what I call rescueitis, we need to let go of this knee-jerk tension, a knee-jerk tendency to take away the experience and provide them a different reason for why they should be grateful that their child died. As one client told me, she was told, "Congratulations, you now have an angel in heaven."
Yeah.
And so fundamentally, it's being there. And if anybody ever saw the movie with Peter Sellers called Being There, you understand it's just that,
Hmm.
showing up.
Yeah. Now I want to ask what I think is an interesting question, because you mentioned this tendency as a kid to naturally want to lift people's spirits and make them laugh and make them feel better. And I'm wondering how that part of you appeared, or what you did with that part of you when you were suddenly in the role of grief counselor. Did that part of you show up at all? Was there an impulse to want to make people cheer up and feel better and not feel their pain?
Actually, more what happened is that I understood that when the timing was right, and comedy is all about timing, that it was important for clients to be able to laugh. And even now, with clients those whose children have died.
Mm,
Of course, I take my cues from them,
yeah.
that being able to laugh or smile or remind themselves of the absurdity was important. So it didn't show up that tendency to cheer up, to try to take away, because I understood at 26 from the death of my mother,
Right.
that was the opposite of what you needed to do.
Do you think you would have had that intuitive understanding had you not experienced that loss yourself?
I think the combination, I think there was no way. I mean, I came to understand grief and loss through living it. And I think unless you've had a significant person die or grieved the loss of a pet or a relationship and know what mourning feels and looks like, you might not know it.
Hmm.
But again, at 20, I understood about, through the meditation, allowing what was there to be there. And that became how I held space with others, by helping them to allow what was there to be present.
Yeah, I don't know what I believe about this whole life setup. I think it changes maybe hour by hour. But when I hear you tell your story and listen to this convergence of like life experiences that led you to the work that you do, mindfulness showing up as it did when it did, the loss of your mother as it did when it did. Now, this, of course, could just be my human natural desire to make meaning out of things, which is built into us, right? It seems. But it is kind of startling that all of these experiences and the timing of them converged in such a way as to like facilitate your doing the work that you do. At least it can be seen that way in retrospect, right?
Absolutely. And a perfect example of that was being out in California again as a tourist. And a couple asked me to take their picture with their camera. And upon hearing the click, something happened in me. And I had the impulse to, when I came home, to buy a camera. No interest, no training. And I discovered, quite surprisingly, that I had an eye for composition. And Albert Camus wrote, "In the midst of winter, I found in me an invincible summer." Well, for me, in the midst of summer, I found in me a photographer. Soon after, I was exhibiting my photography at the National Stationery Show in New York, being approached by the Walt Disney Company to sell my images and photograph California. And so, to your point, again, no intention to be a grief educator or therapist, no intention to be a photographer. So trusting those moments
Mm.
and following them is quite important.
Yeah, and this, you had mentioned a little earlier, and this seems like the perfect time to bring back up the subject of calling and callings.
Yeah.
I had a gentleman on the podcast by the name of Greg Lavoie, who wrote a book called Callings. That is, an absolutely wonderful book that I recommend to anyone, and it's about the different ways in which callings present themselves to us and the different ways in which we might tune into them. So I would love to hear you speak
Right.
to this.
So, of course, a calling, people hear that and it's like, forget about it. You know, that's mumbo jumbo.
Woo woo.
Yeah, well, and so, but it's just this, the simplest example is you're driving down a road and you feel this impulse, I should turn down this road and see what's down there. And you go down there and a beautiful pond is there and park bench, and you're sitting at a spot you weren't planning to be at. It's trusting this whisper. It could come as a word, it could come as a thought, a feeling, a sense of this. I should pursue this. And often people don't pursue it. They just, for a variety of reasons, feel like I can't, it's not practical. And
Or it
I
doesn't make rational sense. They can't understand
have,
it rationally. Yeah.
right. But the following of it is like kind of peeling back. I think it's an artichoke that has a million leaves and it takes days to get to whatever you're supposed to be eating in that. It's peeling something back to see what is at the center of it. And for me, everything that was consequential came through that. Another example, I was not planning to be a father or have kids. I just didn't see that. Here I was going off on these retreats. How was I ever going to be a dad and do that kind of training? And I just didn't see it for myself. And then Mother Teresa came outside of Boston to speak at a church. I learned of Mother Teresa. And here I am, grew up in a Jewish family, wound up pursuing Buddhist meditation, and now I'm going to hear Mother Teresa speak. And I got there the night before because I didn't want to meet her. I learned about her through Jack Cornfield. He played a video on one Christmas retreat that I'd gone to. And I was so taken by who she was, who I thought she was. And I met a woman that night while waiting to Teresa. I guess, now that I think about it, it's another circumstance as with that woman in the row I was trying to date. And this woman was divorced. She had a 1.5 and a 4-year-old. And I was so blown away by those kids that something opened in me. And I realized that, in fact, I did want to be a dad. And some years later, we broke up. It didn't last a long time. I met a woman from Burma, which is where some of my teachers had studied, I mentioned. And I became a father. And I have a 26-year-old son who's also my teacher, as kids can be. But it's one of those, I hadn't really planned to go hear Mother Teresa speak, but I felt called to get there the night before. And who knows, if I didn't, maybe I would not have become a dad.
Yeah. Wow. Do you feel like life is leading us in some way to things, or do you feel that experiences simply open our awareness to aspects of ourselves that may or may not otherwise get activated? What do you think about these kinds of questions?
Well, I'm reminded of Rumi. I don't know if I have this exactly right, but he said, take a step on the path, and the path appears. And so I do think there is a choice, apparently, to exercise that kind of discretion of, is this something I'm going to do? Others might call, as you alluded to earlier, fate. So you talked about my posting on LinkedIn and Facebook. I was on LinkedIn only to help my son look for a job. He didn't ask for my help, but I was on there looking.
Now, was that your first ever experience on social media?
I had been on Facebook with just my own pictures of friends and family. And I had joined LinkedIn years earlier, maybe looking for a job, but I was there to help him get a job. And I came across a post, and this was at the start of the pandemic. And in 10 minutes before between clients, I started to write something about hope. It was at the beginning when there were just thousands of people dying
Mm.
globally. And again, there was this calling in me to step up and do something deeper, to be of service. Again, no intention to be a writer, no intention to be involved in social media. It was just a one-off on Hope, and I posted it. But I recognized something in me,
Mm.
and that's how the posting began. Even though I've been a teacher, teacher by that not in a school, but I've been lecturing around the United States for decades on grief and loss to healthcare and mental health professionals. And it wasn't about information or theories. It was, as Leo Buscaglia awakened my heart, it was to awaken the hearts of helpers to remind themselves why they came to social work or nursing or what have you. And so it's grown now for me on LinkedIn into just recently, I saw that I had gotten 7,000 followers. I know I don't know what that means, as my mother probably would say, 7,000 followers and 75 cents will get you a Hershey bar. Probably
Yeah,
not anymore.
not these days, but
This whole thing became something based on a calling
Mm.
and trusting it. And Mother Teresa herself described a calling she had on a train. So, yes, it's a long-winded way of telling you callings matter, and they appear in a million different ways.
Right. How do we make ourselves available to them so that we hear them when they knock?
Being quiet inside. If you live a so that syndrome life, I got to go shopping so that I can come home and do my yoga, so that then I can make dinner, so that then I can meditate, so then I can go to sleep, so that you're not going to hear anything and you're not going to feel it. It is about allowing silence, quiet to be in your life, to take time to be with yourself,
Hmm.
to listen deeply to who you are and what you're about. And something we don't like to do. We're afraid of silence. We like to be busy. And so it's that moment in which you're quiet enough to have this sense. Calling can be a sense.
Yeah.
You know what? I should call my old girlfriend back. I miss her. What could be anything? So silence and quiet allows for it to arise.
Yeah. There were a few different questions that came up while listening to you speak, so I'm going to choose one. You had mentioned that there was a posting you found on LinkedIn before you posted yourself. There was a posting that caught your attention. Do you remember what that was?
I I don't recall any particular post on
Oh,
LinkedIn that started it.
okay. But you had been on the platform searching for a job for your son, and because of what was going on in the world, you felt this impulse to put this message of hope on there that you had
Yes,
jotted down in between
yes,
clients.
yes.
Yeah.
So that was it. In that post that I put up about hope was the catalyst for the impulse.
Right. But again, there's this convergence, right? Because when you initially jotted down those ideas in
Right?
between clients, did you have any intention for sharing them, or at that point?
Zero.
Zero. So
No.
so it just so happened, again, this convergence of like what's
Yes.
going on in the world and you taking the time to write down some thoughts, and you happen to be on this platform because you're searching for a job for your son who didn't ask you to do it. And then you realize there's an opportunity here where I can actually share this, and it might help. It might be of help. It might uplift someone, or it might remind people of their, resilience at a time when such a thing is really needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
There's levels of understanding that we don't know about.
right. We do. I don't know about you, but I do want to understand. um, okay, so another way to listen to potential callings. I know that you've told this story about an interaction that you had with Ram Dass. You had sought out perhaps his counsel about some personal issue you were having, and he said something pretty memorable to you. Can you share what
Yeah,
that was?
I remember going to his house. It was any one of a number of dramas, relational dramas, and he was such a beautiful soul and funny himself. He was really amazingly funny. And he said he gave me his wisdom about what to do. And then I went on again, blah, blah, blahing about why it was important that I hold and cling to what I was clinging to. And he looked at me and smiled and he said, "Suffer on, Mitch, suffer on." And it was really a kind of a catalyst for the ways in which I came to understand how we perpetuate our suffering, how we are architects of our well-being as our suffering, and what to do and how to do it to let go of that, to interrupt that, to disrupt the habitual tendencies because they're familiar that create suffering in our lives. And yes, that interaction was a pivotal moment.
And it makes me think that suffering itself you could view as a calling, because it's like there's the classic term of people hitting rock bottom before they're finally motivated to make an important change in their life.
Right.
And so suffer on also speaks to, you had said earlier that you believe we do have a choice in the matter of whether we heed a calling, whether we listen to an intuition or not. We can always choose to, as Ram Dass pointed out, hey, suffer on. You don't have to listen to me, or you don't have to do something differently. You can choose to repeat this cycle of suffering for as long as you care to, and then eventually, at some point, and see, to me, I see that as I see it anyway, as a message from life. Like, okay, you want to keep suffering, and it's like, it's sort of when you're ready, then to cry uncle, I've had enough. Then you could see that as responding to a call to make some change in the way you're living your life.
Suffering is at the heart of certainly Buddhist teachings. The Buddha's first noble truth was saying there's suffering in life, not a great, new idea. But Ram Dass wrote a book called Grist for the Mill, and he talks about using suffering as an opportunity for transformation. And, certainly over the last couple of years, there have been a number of health challenges for me, not the least of which back in May, my retina detached. And anybody can write things on social media, but you really find out who you are when you have to deal with your suffering. And mindfulness is about forming a relationship with our suffering in which we don't make it the enemy. Going back to the grief that we were talking about earlier, my message to people is to befriend your sorrow, to be a good host for it. If you make grief the enemy, you will suffer more. And so it's the willingness to not say, I got to get rid of this suffering so I can then get to a place of peace. It's the ability to cultivate equanimity in the face of our suffering.
Yeah, and I have a question for you that this provokes, which is children, little kids. it seems to me observationally that kids are natural grievers. What I mean is, like, they'll cry at a loss, however seemingly insignificant it is to us adults, but they'll cry until they've gotten it out of them.
Right.
And they have no aversion to expressing their sorrow or grief. They have no shame about it until we indoctrinate them and tell them, don't cry over spilled milk, blah, blah, blah. So do you believe then that our stifling of our own grief or our aversion to our own grief, do you believe that that is a culturally perpetuated phenomenon, or is it something that would occur naturally? What do you think?
So there's no doubt that every culture comes to grief and mourning and death in very different ways. And some cultures really provide avenues for the healthy expression of loss. There's also no doubt that in America, and it was worse in past years, that we shame children for crying.
Hmm.
Don't be a sissy. Big boys don't cry. Soldier on, soldier up. Don't be a girl. There are so many messages in which we punish kids for vulnerability.
Hmm.
And so one part is that we learn earlier that it's not okay to be sad. The other is that we're so preoccupied with how we will be perceived. And almost universally here in this country, you hear someone start crying, you see them crying, and they apologize. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What's that about? It's about shame. It's like they violated a rule. You're not supposed to cry. And so my work is that we need to come to a radically different understanding about grief. And in being a good host, in honoring it. When we cut our hands, we wouldn't feel shame about bleeding, because you know that when you cut yourself, you bleed. When our hearts are lacerated by loss, we mourn. That's what it means to be human. You never need to apologize for crying, for your sorrow. Sorrow, grief is an expression of our love. And so, yes, we learn early in life about shame and vulnerability.
Yeah. And so we have to, but it would behoove us to reprogram ourselves and those impulses that were learned to stifle our feelings, especially in front of other people. But this is really powerful, this stuff, because it's unspoken. It's like you said, breaking a rule. Well, you won't find this rule written anywhere, but it's so embedded in our culture.
Right.
I know I've even had the experience of feeling myself kind of in a completely private moment, uh, being moved to tears or wanting to cry, and stopping myself. There's no one else in the room. That's how embedded that these messages are.
Right. So what you just described is like going into a doctor's office who's checking your reflexes, and they tap your knee and your leg goes out. Our relationship to sadness is reflexively, not everyone obviously, is containing it.
Yeah.
And so we need to see that really grief is a part of life. And there's nothing to be, it's just really to get out of the way of it. The more you get out of the way of it, it moves through you. And then you're not, partly We have role models. We've had role models. JFK's wife, after he was assassinated president, the model of how to deal with grief was her stoicism.
Mm.
She was holding up well. And we see grief as an expression of weakness, and crying, you're a baby. And actually, it takes a lot of strength to allow yourself to cry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
When my dad died, I'd be shaving, and then there was, just out of nowhere, which grief comes that way, would come up. I would put the razor down, I would sit down, and I would just let it rip.
Hmm.
When it was done, I'd go back to shaving. And so you form this relationship to your grief that is an alliance.
Hmm.
And in that alliance,
Is there something else I can help with?
even
That was life. That was life. Just
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Even Siri wants to get in on the action. We want to create safety within ourselves and with other people to have their feelings in our presence and for us to have them in our own presence.
What strikes me about what you just shared is this word allowing, allowing the grief to be there, to move through us, making room for it, accepting it. It interrupts something you're doing. That's okay. You allow it, and then you return to the task once it's, I don't know that it's always practical or to do that in every possible situation. I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking if you're driving a car and you get a wave of grief, maybe it makes sense to pull over and sob and then get back on the road. But maybe that's exactly what you were just describing, though. Certainly there are social situations in which we feel that it's inappropriate, rightly or wrongly.
Right.
But this idea of allowing is so interesting to me. Even just in hearkening back to what we were talking about listening and callings, that making room for them and allowing an intuition that maybe it interrupts our day. Maybe we had a plan. Like you said, I need to do this so that I can do that, so I can do this and I can do that, and I can miss my whole day and go to bed. But like when we get this like curiosity or this impulse, like, you know what? I wonder what's down there. Or oh, you know what? Maybe I could. And allowing those intuitions, for lack of a better word, to making space for them in our life, allowing things to interrupt our plans and making room for them whether it's in a small, tiny way during the course of our day, someone interrupts us and asks us a question, or whether it's in a more huge way where we get interrupted, where we get maybe blindsided by an experience like a loss, and we have to now reconfigure and allow this unanticipated loss that's going to loom large to be in our life with us for however long it needs to be. So this idea of allowing, I think it's counter to a lot of the messaging that we get, to what you were saying, even like in the sort of British stiff upper lip, or the, be stoic, be strong, don't allow, suppress.
Right. This word allowance is really at the heart, first of all, of mindfulness practice, but it's also at the heart of our freedom. Jack Kornfield's teacher, Ajahn Chah, said, let things be as they are. And it doesn't mean we don't protest, we don't try to change something. But for example, grief itself is not the problem. Our resistance to it is. And there's so much that goes on in our life that were we to allow ourselves to surrender to the actuality of what's happening, we would not suffer in the ways that we do. Allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, allowing whatever it is to be present, then we're not in this struggle with if only.
allowing Siri to interrupt our conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. I'm curious as to what motivated you. You got your master's in counseling. You began your practice of counseling. And then you sought another master's degree in social work. What was behind that decision?
That was my not having done due diligence as to what would be the best course of study. University of Florida is where I got my bachelor's degree. They had a very respected counseling program. But in 1982, after graduating that program, I came up to Boston to be on staff of the meditation center. And when I was finished there, when I went to look for a job, I discovered that that master's degree, I couldn't get licensed in the state. That a master's in social work was king or queen. And so it wasn't that I particularly wanted to get another master's degree. It was that I couldn't really get jobs with it. And that became clear. Even though I did work, I worked at hospice, worked in a mental health center, but it was clear in order to get licensed, that was the degree of the soup du jour. The other thing is that I went back in 1986 to get that degree at Simmons University, and I knew I needed also more training. That after some years in the field, it would be better to get a deeper education. And I did. I trained at a premier mental health clinic, and it turned out, separate from the licensing issue, to be a great choice.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
It's nice that proved valuable for you, and
Yes.
not just another hoop to jump through.
Right.
Okay, so what I'm wanting to know, you have these 2 master's degrees. You've had your share of training and your study of theory, and you have had now you've had decades worth of actual experience with clients. What I'm wondering is, based on your knowledge of both theory and practice, which is pretty deep, what if you could create a curriculum for therapists? What would it look like?
For the training of therapists?
Yeah.
So, first and foremost, I would train them in grief and loss in all of the mosaics that it shows up in our life. There is virtually, and maybe it's changed, almost no training in this for clinicians. When I was a first-year student, when I was actually a second-year student at Simmons, I was training the first-year students in bereavement because there was no classes in it. So that would be one. The other is self-worth, self-love. There would be a course, there would be a whole semester on courses around self-esteem, self-worth, self-care, self-love. Because as I see it and know it, that is at the heart of so much of our struggles that we hold, and it's universally, we hold ourselves in little regard. And so that would be another huge component. The other would be meditation. That would be and people could choose whatever they want, but mindfulness meditation would absolutely be a required course to learn how to be within oneself in that way. And so the ways that loss shows up in our lives, the significance of self-love, self-care, self-esteem, and of mindfulness. Those would be 3. The last one would be the artistry of conflict resolution. We're not very good at that, at what to do with conflicts and communicate, how to work with the repair of them. So those just coming to my top of
To
my
me,
head. Yeah.
Mitch, first of all, I think that's beautiful. And to me, I think that should be our elementary school curriculum.
Yes.
Right? Seriously.
Yeah.
Um, wow. It's in true Jack Hornfield style. I've seen him. I have not worked with him one-on-one, but I have seen him at different workshops, and he's absolutely wonderful. And to have trained with him must have been really special. But I was going to say, in true Jack Hornfield style, as I've seen him do when he facilitates talks and whatnot, is he has like a whole huge amount of things on stage with him. And as he's moved to, and as it feels relevant, he'll pull up a poem and read it, or whatever. Like, he has this whole repertoire with him of stuff, and he uses it as it feels, as he's called to.
Yes.
And similarly, at this point in our conversation, I'm moved to just read a short excerpt from one of your postings that I took note of. And this is it. You wrote, "We are indeed together in this journey of being human. While our story may seem different, the threads of challenge and joy are remarkably similar. We all want to be happy and hurt to see those we love in pain. There is a collective amnesia in the fact that we matter. My friends, do not despair in the mirage that you are alone in your heart. We are all connected as we carry the gift of being alive. In moments of heaviness, be merciful with yourself. When lost, ask someone else how they are carrying theirs. There is help along the way." That feels relevant to your curriculum as you stated it. And the one line that really jumped out at me from that passage was this one, where you say, "There is a collective amnesia in the fact that we matter." And I've noticed that in a lot of your postings, you come back to this idea of mattering.
Right.
And so my question for you now is, what would you say? What argument would you make to someone who feels that in the scheme of things, they don't matter, or they certainly don't feel like they matter? And in today's world, I think it's really easy to feel that way, where we're just inundated with so much noise coming from so many different directions. And it feels like, what difference does anything I do or say make?
Right.
So I'd love for you to speak to that, this question of mattering, and do we matter,
Right.
and why, and yeah.
So a couple of examples. Great question. Recently, I wrote a post about a man in California. I'm sorry, a man in California who left. He was on the Golden Gate Bridge. He was planning to take his life, and he left. He had written a note: "If one person smiles, I won't jump." And no one smiled, and he jumped. I included in that post a story of this man in Australia who saved 160 lives at this place where many people had gone to jump to their death. And all he said is, "Can I be of any help?" And he invited them to talk about what was happening and how they mattered, and that mattered. And finally, I remember going into New York, and I was approached by a man without a home, and I gave him money. But then I did something more important than money. I asked him his name. And when I asked him his name, he lit up and he said, I wasn't always in this place. I had a family. I had children. And by simply asking him his name, he understood that he mattered. And so you began this interview talking about a drop, the post that I wrote about a drop of reminding each other how they matter in our life can be transformative. In the midst of the enormity of what's happening to us in living at this time in the world, we forget our significance. And you're online in a grocery store and just saying to the cashier, how are you doing? How's it going? Being that smile, caring matters. We all need to be touched by love, by empathy, by kindness. And my case for why it matters is because it does. Try it and see. Try it and see. Mother Teresa said, do not seek to do great things, but small things with great love. And that's an expression of mattering.
What I take from what you shared is that we are called, you could say, to remind each other that we matter.
Right.
Because we crave this. We crave this. The message of the guy who says, if one person smiles, we crave, we need to be validated. We need to be seen, and we need to be cared for and reminded that we actually do matter.
Right. Right. It was 52 years ago that I first heard Leo Buscaglia. We are hungry for love. And the simplest of gestures reminds us that we can matter, that we're significant, as you said. We need to be seen. We need to be heard. We need to know we matter, Eric.
Yeah. Well, Mitch, you matter to me. and I am grateful to you for your shares on, on social media that are very impactful. And I'm very, how can I say? I don't use social media too much, and I try to be as mindful as possible about my usage of it. And there's a lot of noise on social media. There is some value too. And your posts, jumped through the morass of, I don't even know what word to use, but noise, and touched me deeply. And sometimes, like I say, I'm moved to tears by the things that you share. And so I want to honor you and say that you have mattered to me. And I know just from the responses that you've gotten to your postings that I'm not alone, that the things that you've shared have meant a great deal and mattered a lot to people. And the fact you do this every day is astounding to me. So if you don't mind, if you have the time, I have just two more questions I'd like to ask you.
I could talk with you, Eric, for hours because you have such a beautiful heart that jumps out of this screen. And it mattered that you invited me to share what I do, who I am, why it matters.
Thank you for that. So my first question of the last two is, what is your process? You post these reflections each day. And again, I'm always tickled by how much contrast there is between your shares and the majority of what I see on social media. A lot of what I see on social media is cookie cutter, it's memes, it's cutesy, or it's self-promoting, or it's annoying. And then in the midst of all of that, I get like a mini Dharma talk, a mini sermon in the best possible uses of those words. It's short by the standards of a sermon or a Dharma talk. It's long by the standards of a typical in one ear out the other social media post. And so I'm curious to know, what is your process for creating and sharing these messages? And have you literally been doing it every single day since you started?
I'll tell you, but you have to promise not to tell anybody.
I
Oh, wait a
won't tell a soul.
minute. Okay, excellent. And so in the beginning, I was posting every other day, every third day, and then soon into it, and the writing has evolved considerably. I began posting every day. But the process is quite powerful and remarkable for me to bear witness to. And so I'm up early, I have my coffee, and then I spend time searching the internet for a photo, for a photo that calls to me as having a story in it that needs to be told. And so I find these remarkable images, and I may sit on them for a while. And then I begin, I light a candle, I begin to allow that story to move through me. And I can see that when I'm here out of the service of alleviating suffering in people, awakening love and compassion, and imparting some wisdom for others. So I come to that question, what is the story and what matters? And then there it is. So the photo calls me, the story is awakened in me, and I start writing. And I could see as I do it that it writes itself, that I am in fact a messenger for that which needs to happen. And there's no doubt people will say to me all over the world, I feel like you're speaking to me. I really needed this today. And so I trust deeply, Eric, in this process of allowing, again, healing to move through me. And it does.
Beautiful. And again, in sharp contrast with a lot of what I see on social media, it's evident that your shares are written in real time. What I mean is, you'll often reference a current, you couldn't have pre-written, you couldn't have like written them in advance and scheduled them for posting. Oh, I must have something out every day, so I'm going to spend, the weekend crafting a whole bunch of posts and then pre-schedule them and da da da. No, like they're in real time response, often to maybe current events or something that's happened in the news, or at least it will be incorporated. And there's sometimes you reference even the comments people have left the previous day. So obviously this couldn't have been, so that also is a refreshing, like, oh, this guy, like, it feels real. It feels real. And how wonderful that is in a world of artifice, of endless like posturing. It feels real. And I think that's why it's so moving to me and so many others.
I want it to be alive.
Yes, it feels alive. Yeah.
Right?
I actually have two more questions now that I think about it. So this question is one of my favorite questions to ask, even though I don't ask it on this show enough. And that is, but because especially you've had the experience of sitting with people in their darkest moments, you've done this for decades, and you've met with people who have suffered, just about every imaginable loss, I would guess, that a human can experience. My question to you, Mitch, is in your observation and even, life experience, what do you think is the most difficult aspect of this human being gig that we all are partaking in?
Mm. I think quite clearly learning how to love each other, learning how to love ourselves seems to be quite a predicament. That there's so much. Now, I hear and have for 43 years listened to the dialogues within each other, within people about their self-judgment, self-loathing, being critical, that I think the most difficult aspect is first and foremost learning how to love yourself, learning how to feel good about who you are, honoring who you are. We are so caught up with whether it's pleasing others, and as I write often, you never need to earn love. You never need to earn the right to be loved. And so I would say that is first and foremost the struggle to be in our own skin and feel proud of ourselves. Encourage people to write a list of feeling proud, you know? And then the other part of that is really loving each other. We take so much personally that isn't. Somebody doesn't respond to a text or an email, and we're already struggling with the resentment about that. And so learning how to let things be as they are, learning about forgiving each other for the bumbling and stumbling that we all do. I don't know if that answers.
It's a great answer. Why do you think this is such a problem? And why do we do this to ourselves? Do you see it as like I know there's this telling of the story of the Dalai Lama who literally when he was addressed about this question of people, I don't remember the exact words, but people, being mean to themselves, being he didn't understand the question. So I wonder, is this a cultural phenomenon that maybe is not a universal one? Why do we judge ourselves so mercilessly and harshly? And, why do we treat ourselves often in ways we would never think of treating other people?
It was Sharon Salzberg who told that story about talking to the Dalai Lama about this self-hatred.
Yeah.
And he couldn't understand why we would treat ourselves in that way. It's not cultural, it's global.
Mm-hmm.
And since I have clients around the world and people are writing me in their comments and have written me privately, it's universal.
Hmm.
And I think what it is that very early, we are indoctrinated and enculturated to know when we're good and when we're bad. We get, whether it's the smiles or adoration or love from a parent or a teacher when we do good, and when we don't, we might get shamed or scolded or alienated.
So it's a survival technique.
Absolutely. And so it's a download. We download music. We've gotten a lot downloaded that has to do with shame. And there's this sense of this lack of acceptance of who we are. The other is that we have all of these images, TV, media, movies, about what it means to be acceptable. And so we compare ourselves and then reject the parts that feel unacceptable.
Do you think there's another way? Is it possible, because it's such a widespread phenomenon? Is there another way to be? Is there a way to prevent such a such an epidemic of self-hatred, or is it just simply a matter of retraining ourselves and combating it and finding ways to deal with it, do you think?
Well, earlier you mentioned that the curriculum I mentioned for training therapists should be done in kindergarten.
Hmm.
And so, yes, I mean, I think that we flood kids with stuff that they may never use or doesn't matter.
Hmm.
And the things that most matter are not taught. So that's one place. There was a book written, Everything I Needed to Learn, Everything I Needed to Know, I learned in kindergarten.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The other is we have no real understanding of our minds. We spend more time training our dogs. People spend thousands of dollars training their pets, but have no self-training with our mind. And so when a thought says, you're no good, it says jump, we say how high. And so mindfulness is not just a cool thing, but it's a way to open the hood on our mental activity and develop some space. So when a thought shames us, we don't identify with it. We don't listen to it. We let it arise like the bubble that it is and just let it pass like a cloud through the sky. That is a way to transform it. And finally, I encourage people to go online and look up Sharon Salzberg or Jack Cornfield guided loving kindness meditation. It's a practice of working with a series of reflections to help us to work with ourselves.
Yeah, I've used Jack's guided loving kindness meditation recordings, and it was profound.
Right.
It was profound, and it's a practice. So it's not just a one and done, because you can have different experiences with it on different days, but it's if you can adopt it even for periods of time as a practice, as something that you do for in a formal way, sitting, listening to a recording and moving through it as you're guided through it, but also just in as you go about your life during the day, if you ever, I mean, you have the presence of mind just as you're walking down the street to wish people silently, may you be well, may you be free from suffering, may you be happy. It's not about having some illusion about changing the world through wishful thinking. It changes you. It changes you because you're moving through the world in a more heartful way.
Yes. I like to say people feel very helpless about what's happening in the world. I often write, save the moment, not save the world. And in that saving of the moment is that open-hearted connection or kindness that we're so desperately in need of. You used the word sermon earlier to describe my writing, and it reminded me that back in 1987, I was invited to give a talk at a university, and the professor said to me, you could have been a rabbi. Not because my knowledge of Judaism, but really all of my teaching is about inspiration. And sometimes it can come across as a sermon. It's not, again, about beliefs.
Right. That's why I said I meant it in the most positive connotation, because like not as like a lecture or this is how you should, but more just as like a beautiful sharing of wisdom.
Yes.
Okay, so Mitch, thank you, sir, for everything and for sharing this time with me and this conversation. I'm most grateful. And I'm going to, as an intro to my last question, I promise this is the last question, I want to read another excerpt from your writings that will serve as an intro to my last question. So you wrote here, when we come to the end of this journey, we will reflect on choices we made. Some may stir deep joy, while others painful remorse. The gift found in the elevation of our awareness now is that we are empowered to change the course of our flight. As we look back on who we said we wanted to be, there can be a deeper commitment to aligning with that aspiration. If generosity matters, do not wait until the end to give away what doesn't.
Mm.
It's good stuff.
I'd like to meet that guy.
That guy's got, he's got it. And it also really speaks to the whole theme of this show about becoming the person you want to be and about being intentional, not being perfect, but just being intentional and moving in the direction more
Right.
in alignment with who you really want to be and with what really matters. So with that as an introduction, I will ask you, Mitch, now at this point, at this moment, at this age and stage of your life, who is the person you most want to be today and moving forward?
You know, Eric, I am who I want to be. And I am who I've always wanted to be, which is a person who understands the importance of compassion and love, a person who can in an instant have someone smile or laugh, a person who has spent his life working on cultivating wisdom and understanding. And so I don't have any aspiration of who I would like to become because I like who I am.
Mm.
I have a deep regard for what I see myself doing. And so there hasn't been a journey of becoming someone that I wanted to be. It's been a journey of accepting who I am in each frame of the film. And so I know that others they have this kind of aspiration of who they want to be. And I would encourage everyone to embrace who you are with all of it, without feeling this, if only.
Mm.
If only I were this, then I'd really, bada bing, bada boom, I'd really be.
Yeah.
And I think it was Rumi that talked about being a farmer of the soul. And so it's important to think about what you want to cultivate. What matters really? Do you want to cultivate a better Roth IRA? Do you want to cultivate what is it you're wanting? What matters? Jack Kornfield said in the end, the question you'll ask yourself is, did I love well? Because it won't matter. Everything else won't. And so I think it's extraordinarily important that we be intentional with what you want to grow and water it. And water it.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Mitch Davidowitz, thank you again, and many blessings your way. May you be happy. May you be well. May you be free from suffering. And I extend these wishes to everyone watching or listening and myself.
And Eric, I'll add one that's a little out of that. May everyone have the blessing and the gift to sit with you and be invited to be seen and heard in the beautiful way that you do that.
Wow. I'm honored, Mitch. Thank you.